Hello, I am Edward. Imagine a city of pillars gleaming like a heat mirage, a market heavy with frankincense. Then imagine the sand taking one breath and the city vanishing. They called it Iram, the city of pillars, last long-burning desert lantern on the incense road. But the reality is even more intriguing. Iram stood where caravans narrowed into single-file columns and where wells and watchtowers meant power. Traders moved like slow-moving rivers, carrying resin, myrrh, fabrics, and whispers. Whoever owned the gates owned the tolls, and tolls could purchase alliances in far-distant halls. So why did a city like that fall silent? One answer says, pride invited ruin. Another blames a builder who pushed his walls faster than the ground could bear. A third points to geology, to a crust glittered with salts that holds for years and then slumps without warning. The desert rarely ends a city with thunder. It erases it grain by grain until a traveler rides across a vanished gate and never feels the threshold. Clues surface only when the wind permits. After a night of hard gusts, pale arcs appear where streets once turned. After rare rain, a buried wall writes a faint line across a slope. From the air at first light, an oval lies where a drift should be, a grid where chaos should rule. One trail of stories leads to a place where stones look burned and greened, as if molten glass had been poured on the ground. Some say a fire from the sky struck there and shook dunes beyond the horizon. If a trading capital stood near such a blow, people would scatter faster than any army. Was Iram close enough to feel that strike? Or did the same sky that threw a stone also send winds that finished what time began? Another trail points to bedrock itself. Beneath the crust the limestone breathes. Dig too many wells, stamp too many feet, stack towers on a tired floor, and the floor sighs. A tower does not fall in flame. It kneels, add a season of unusual rain, a week of heavy caravans, and one storm to move loosened dunes, and what seemed permanent at breakfast becomes rumor by sunset. Yet the truth behind the name might surprise you. Iram may not be one city at all, but a title given to places that shone like beacons of trade on the incense road. Wherever columns rose high enough to guide caravans by starlight, travelers may have used the same word. If so, the legend is scattered rather than lost. The task is to gather its pieces and see how trade bound them, like beads on a caravan cord. Now picture the patient walker who climbs a dune at dawn. The wind is absolutely windless. Ahead lies a shallow curve where ripples should be. A pale rectangle interrupts a field of waves. Kneel and the sand whispers of worked stone under your palm. Stand and a line runs toward a dry wadi like a street that forgot its people. 10 steps more and the marks turn shy again. The desert wins on points, what would count as proof, not a single coin or a broken jar. A plan. Streets that meet by rule instead of accident. Columns planted in rows that keep a rhythm. A well lined with dressed blocks and the resin stain of jars lowered 1,000 times. A store floor hard as hammer-beaten earth. Even one of these would pull the story out of smoke and into breath. There is one more clue, easy to miss. Where a settlement once stood, the wind writes a different grammar. Ripples snag on edges you cannot see and gather into straight-lined bands. Tufts of grass stand in ranks they did not intend. When the sun rakes the ground at a shallow angle, those lines glow like old ink. Follow them far enough and they lead to places where the sand sounds hollow under heel, as if a room listens from below. Stay with me because in a moment we will follow those lines to a rise the color of ash, where the crust is thin and the ground keeps a secret. If what waits there matches the old promise of pillars, We may watch a name step back into daylight, drawn from silence by patience, wind, and a little luck. Follow the lines and you reach a low ridge where the sand sounds thin, underfoot, as if the ground keeps a breath it refuses to release. Brush aside a handful of grains and a corner of cut stone. Taps your palm, not proof yet, but a promise that tells us where to listen harder. Guides read noon shadows to learn whether a dune is marching or anchored. When travelers speak of pillars on the horizon, they may be pointing to wind-carved sandstone ridges, or to a memory that outlived its walls. From high above, the sand is a veil. When the angle of light is right, faint grids appear for minutes and then fade. Researchers stack images from different hours and seasons until the ground begins to confess straight lines. Seen from altitude, faint city geometry reappears and holds long enough to be mapped. Sometimes a single sunrise reveals a lattice no eye saw the day before, and by noon the pattern is gone again, as if the land changed its mind. But the reality is even more intriguing. The desert often preserves the negative of a city, rather than its face. Where a wall-blocked wind, ripples still stall. Where a street channeled rain, the crust holds a darker seam line. A buried well leaves a circle that traps seeds and grows a ring of desert grass. Together these signs speak more loudly than a single relic. Taken together, their geometry forms a quiet blueprint, hidden in tone, texture, and drift, a low voice the land uses to recall its own architecture. What would the city of pillars look like if it rose again? Under careful hands, picture towers not for battle, but for guidance, lanterns of honeyed stone, telling riders they had reached the correct gate after a week of sand and starlight. Why does this story matter? Because trade is a kind of language, and a vanished city is a lost phrase in that language. Find the grammar of its streets, and you rediscover how people timed wells, guarded a cistern, and stored resin against heat. You also learn how ambition strained a foundation. In those patterns, logistics, belief, and climate braid into decisions, visible only when patience and distance line. Searchers know a familiar loop. You think you see a plan, then doubt returns. To break it, you test the ground where lines cross, sink a narrow core and bring up grains from different layers. If the lowest layer holds charcoal or crushed shell, a hand has been here. If a shard bears a scratch that repeats across other shards, that is a maker speaking across time. But the desert negotiates. Give it respect, and it gives you glimpses. Demand certainty too quickly, and it answers with a storm. The wisest teams map from a distance, then step closer only where the pattern begs for a question. They listen to people who carry stories in song and in roots, because memory often walks where proof will later stand. Now for the twist we have been circling. Iram may be both a place and a mirror. Each time a trading post grew tall enough to light the night road, the name found a new home. When one fell, another carried the torch. The legend stayed whole while the map changed. If that is true, the city is not simply lost. It is multiplied, waiting to be recognized wherever pillars once taught a traveler to trust the horizon. So we leave the dune and look forward. The next clue will not be a golden column, it will be rhythm. A rhythm of spacing in stones, a rhythm of wells along a line to a dry river. When a rhythm repeats beyond chance, a city steps out from beneath the sand, and a story that felt like heat, shimmer mirage becomes ground you can touch. Stand for a final moment and let the wind settle. The ridge looks ordinary again. That is the desert keeping its dignity. But you will walk away with new eyes. When a cloud shifts and a shadow draws a straight-edged shadow line across a slope, you will not see weather. You will see a wall remembering its duty. You will notice faint lines in gravel where carts once turned. Somewhere ahead, after the next storm, Iram will stop being a question and return as a map you can read with your feet.